I really don't think the market matters as much as people think. The only thing that makes a market good is if I can find deals. But anytime someone says like, I'm out of the market right now, or they're waiting for it to bottom or something like that, to me, that means they just have no clue what they're talking about, like zero clue. When you structure the contract with the contractor, make sure that pretty much you always owe them money and they never owe you more.
Decoding real estate careers. The punchline of that article?
Real estate careers, there's obviously a ton of them. I don't want to offend anyone because the article is written pretty blatantly, but basically you only want to be in a few careers.
My name is Omar Morales. I'm a commercial real estate broker that's closed over $3 billion worth of deals in South Florida. This gives me access to some of the most prolific real estate deal makers in not only South Florida, but also the country. My goal with the Real Estate Deal Makers podcast is to keep the conversations timely and current so you have a better understanding of where the market is today, and more importantly, where the leaders of this industry think it might be tomorrow. So let's dive into today's conversation. My conversation today is with the famous anonymous account, The Real Estate God, that has over 100,000 followers on Twitter. He truly has a unique approach to the real estate game we all play that I think you'll enjoy learning about. He is property type agnostic and focuses on tertiary markets where nobody else is looking. Aside from diving into and learning how to replicate the incredible success he's had there, I selfishly ask him a ton of questions on how he has been leveraging the internet to build his real estate platform that has led to more investors, more deals, and differentiated streams of income. I learned a ton about how to approach my career life differently, and I'm sure you will too. Here's my conversation with the Real Estate God. Hey, Michael, super appreciate you taking the time to be here. Most people know you as the Real Estate God, but I appreciate you at least allowing me to call you Michael on the pod. So give a little people some color there. But I guess where I'd want to start with you and what I think makes you the most unique is the internet and how you've sort of leveraged it to grow, frankly, a real estate platform of one, right? Obviously, you have people that you work with. And I think a lot of people in the pod are listening to this and they work in real estate, they operate in real estate, they see how they can leverage the internet, but they're like, how do I do it? So if you can maybe kick us off with like how you started in real estate, and then when did you start experimenting in the internet, and when did you really start doubling down?
Sure, yeah. So got my start in real estate right out of college. Actually got an internship in college. And kind of fell into it. I basically, sophomore summer, everyone was doing kind of the corporate recruiting. I didn't want to do that and wasn't really a fan of it. And ended up getting an internship kind of on campus at a startup that basically catered to entry-level jobs. And became pretty good friends with the CEO of the startup who had exited some companies beforehand. And just like one day I was kind of just having a drink with him on a Friday night. And he's like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know, I want to work in private equity. He's like, okay, one of my good friends runs a real estate private equity firm. You want to interview there? And I was like, sure. So I interviewed there, I got asked one technical question, got it completely wrong. The rest of the time I just like talked about fishing, I don't know, and they just gave me the job. So I ended up interning there and then getting a return offer. So kind of fell into it. Always knew I wanted to work in finance, but fell into that a bit. And then from there, really just stayed there. It was kind of institutional shop. In the mid-market space, so call it the $20 to $200 million space.
And your role was acquisitions?
I was on the acquisition side, but it was kind of it's a smaller shop in the mid-market range, so it really wasn't siloed. So you're working on asset management, you're working on acquisitions. It's kind of a healthy mix, more of an investments role than anything else. Yeah, and basically from there, started buying deals almost immediately by myself, and kind of was able to segue that. 2 years ago, I left to start my own real estate firm. And I focus on deals in the $2 to $20 million range across all asset classes, but with more of a multifamily lean, and really looking for home run deals. So looking to do 1 to 3 home run deals a year, not looking to scale. I don't want to manage a big organization. I really just want high impact deals that bring me no stress and I don't spend a lot of time managing. So that's what I've done.
Walk me through how you were able to do your first deal while you were still, working with someone. How did you find it? How did you put the money together? How big was it?
Yeah, so actually my first deal was with my now business partner. We were working together and we were working late one night. And we're just like, all right, like fuck this. Like we're not working for anyone else anymore. Let's go find a deal. So it was like 10 o'clock and we just start looking for our own deals. It took a while. I would say it was probably like 3 or 4 months after we started looking for deals that we found a deal. It was a 200K triplex. I had like no money at the time. I put in 2,500 of my own money. I raised half of the equity for it. We did the deal all equity. He raised the other half. And then we bought it for around 200. I think it was like 202. And then we sold it for 270 like a year later. So that was really the first deal, and then just started scaling from there.
Got it. And then, okay, so you do your first deal, you start, okay, now I want to do something bigger. I want to do more, not necessarily scale, which I think is an important point we'll touch on later. When did because I think what's extremely unique about you and the real estate God handle is like, when did you start sort of messing around with the internet, growing an audience? And was it intentional at first as like, let me grow this audience so I can sort of feed my real estate entrepreneurial endeavors? Or were you just experimenting and it sort of turned into something for you?
Yeah. So I started it like 4 years ago or so. And it was definitely somewhat intentional, right? I wanted to grow an audience. I think also I had the benefit of being there somewhat early in the growth. There weren't that many real estate accounts back then. And just ended up kind of taking off in the beginning. I also think I haven't really optimized it whatsoever. I usually fire from the hip. I would say I just started kind of optimizing the process, and I find that way less fun. I usually like just kind of firing from the hip, and if I want to post, I post. If not, I don't. But yeah, it's been really fun so far, and it's honestly, I don't understand why people don't do it. There's a zero downside scenario, and the leverage of the internet is just infinite. So that's always been confusing to me. How people think it's a weird thing to do, when in reality, it's just the easiest thing possible to do.
It's a no-brainer. And I tell people, I'm like, listen, if what you post sucks and nobody likes it, nobody will see it, right? Like the asymmetric risk and like sharing content is so to everyone's favor that I totally agree with you, where I don't understand why more people don't do it.
It's also like you're just posting what you're doing. Half the time I just post, hey, this is the deal I'm looking at, and I'm underwriting it anyway. What's the difference if I post it online? Right. So it's not even adding a lot of work half the time. And I think most people who struggle with it's because they're not doing anything in their own lives. Right. If you have an interesting life, you're just posting about your life and the deals you're doing or whatever it is. If it's a real estate account, lifestyle account, whatever it is, it ends up doing well just because you're interesting.
Yeah. I think if you're like fired up about what you do, then you just want to talk about it. You want to share about it. You want to find people. Like, I remember how excited I was because we met during COVID, right? COVID hit. I remember having been a fan of you, from afar. I never reached out. And then I think you actually commented, or you tweeted like early 2020 when COVID had just hit, that like Miami has the best like condo residential deals in the country. And you said something like, the fact that you can buy an oceanfront condo in Miami for whatever, like 400 a foot is like bonkers to me. And then I was like, yeah, I totally agree with this guy. I mean, now they're 1,000 a foot, but
I was going to say I should have bought everything back then. I was completely right. I was actually looking at it last night, and I was like, so the exact building I was looking at was 400 a foot pre-COVID. Now it's between 800 and 1,000. And I was just like, I really should have bought everything.
And with a residential mortgage, right? You could have put 5% down.
No, it was such a no-brainer. It was $400 a foot for brand new build in oceanfront. It's insane.
Crazy. Yeah, but what's happened here is like nothing short of a miracle. And I very much see it continue, just not at the rate that it happened, not at the rate that it did over the last 2-3 years. But I remember when you reached out, you're like, hey, I'm going to spend some time in Miami. I was fired up. And when we met and chatted, my biggest takeaway was like, I feel like you write a lot, and I'm curious if like everything that you write, do you post, or is there a lot of stuff that you write that's just like you sort of straightening your thoughts? Because when I talked to you, I felt like you were a clear thinker, which I think comes from writing.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I will say when I do kind of the long form writing pieces, which those of you who haven't followed me for a while, I used to do a lot of them, and they did really well. I would say one of the things that really boosted my following the most on there, those take me forever. Like it takes a really long time to go from 0 to a however many 1,000-word piece it is. And I have a lot of experience with that. I was a history major in college, so I'm used to writing. But I'm one of those people where if I'm not sitting in a blacked out room doing it and I have one distraction, I'm like shot. So I pretty much need to space out like 12 hours of just blank time to do that. Otherwise, I just can't do it. Like I can't stop and start.
Right. That's so funny. So let's actually talk about your content business and sort of where it is today, how it feeds your real estate business, I guess how it started and how it's grown. Because to my understanding, now you've got a community, now you've got other things. So give us some 40,000 foot view and then maybe come down.
Yeah, I mean, it started just kind of randomly firing from the hip on Twitter, right? I think now it's a bit more in depth, and I think a lot of the platform has matured as well. And I think the way you have to post has also changed a lot. Basically, and a lot of people actually complain about the algo changes on Twitter. I think now it actually shows you the best content, because previously, basically what used to happen is you essentially owned your follower list, in that every single tweet you had, all your followers would see it. Now it's kind of the opposite, in that not everyone sees your tweets, but if it's a really good tweet, it gets amplified more than it would have.
Correct.
And I think, personally, I think that's a really good thing, right? Because if you have good tweets that get more people see it, right? It used to be if no one retweeted it or no one commented on it, the only people who saw it was your follower list. So it was really hard to grow, actually. Now it's way easier for a smaller account to grow because everyone sees it if it's a good tweet. So I think it's actually a positive, but it does mean that if you have like a mediocre tweet, it gets hammered. So you can't really
you won't know it's a mediocre tweet because it will get zero traction.
The other thing that's interesting is it used to really matter when you tweeted, right? So if you tweeted at the wrong time and you didn't get traction within the first 5-10 minutes, it got killed. And now that doesn't happen anymore. Now it doesn't really matter when you tweet, because if it's good, it eventually gets shown to people. So I actually think that just shows you how it's way more of a meritocracy than it used to be. It used to be if you had a big follower count, you could just grow forever. And now it's
keep scaling.
Exactly. Now it's way more of a meritocracy.
So you start with your Twitter, and then when do you transition into, I think your newsletter was the next step, or what was the next step after Twitter?
So yeah, I have to think about that. I think I went to email lists first, and then I ended up selling a course through it that I still sell, but not much anymore. Then went into a community. So the community I still run, it's $50 a month, basically an online library of content just related to everything, buying a multifamily deal, everything. I've been posting in it for years. So there's an insane amount of content in there. And I also have essentially an acquisitions boot camp, which is an 8-week program where you work with me one-on-one. And the idea is to do 3 things. One is to refine your strategy and make sure that you're focused on the right things. Really, what most people do in the beginning is they kind of run around like a chicken without their head for a year and they waste a ton of time. So that's the first thing. And then the next is really spending 4 weeks developing those hard skills to actually buy a deal. So underwriting process, how to choose a market, how to close a deal, everything like that in depth, really, really detailed. And then the last 4 weeks are focused on using those skills, getting out in the market and buying a deal. So it really, really is extremely detailed. And if you're looking to buy a deal immediately, I think it's an incredible program.
So you start with the course, call it, in terms of like monetizing it. And you created a course on like how to be a real estate private equity shop, like a one-man shop, if I remember correctly. You start selling that. Then that's basically like on repeat. You have that there. And then you transition to creating a community. That thought happened. Why? And sort of how did the community get started? And
yeah, so it's actually pretty interesting. I was like, why don't I get more recurring income, right? And the community it's $50 a month, so it's recurring income. I think I forget how many people are in there now. It's somewhere between 500 and 1,000. It always fluctuates, but it's way more recurring that way. But it's also a lot of work in the upkeep of it. And what I find, and the reason why I came out with the boot camp, is it's as good as you can get when you're dealing with hundreds of people, right? Because obviously you can't give personal help at that point. You can try, but it's really hard to give fully personalized help when you're kind of writing to 500, 1,000 people at once. So the reason I like the boot camp is it's really focused on you. The first step is all strategy. It's really customized to you. And the idea is basically like the way investment strategy is taught right now is like, hey, like, here's how Warren Buffett did it. Like, go do it. And it's like, how does that make any sense?
Securities analysis.
Right. It makes no sense because you're not Warren Buffett, right? You may have different goals. You probably have different risk profile. Like, why would you learn exactly what he did? Right. And obviously I'm just using him as an example. They do it with other people too, but it's completely irrelevant to what you want to do. What it should be is, all right, here's where I want to get. Let's craft a plan to get there. And that's really the point of the boot camp.
So the community is, call it $50 a month, I think you mentioned. And then the boot camp is how much? And then you walk through what the offering is. But if I'm interested in branching off on my own, understanding what asset class and market I should be focused on, given my strengths and what I know, my expertise, how much is the boot camp? And then, yeah, curious how much it is.
Yeah, so boot camp, there's two options. One is $7,500 for the 8 weeks. And then there's also an option to pay $3,000 just for the 4 weeks if you just want to learn the hard skills and you don't plan on buying a deal immediately.
Got it. And then these people now have access to you. They could show you deals and like, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking. Or is it a boot camp that you already have laid out and you just sort of like, here you go?
So it's pretty personalized. I mean, the first 4 weeks are very well laid out. Once you get into the back 4 weeks, yeah, it's all about trying to find a deal, right? So that's way more customized. It's all about, all right, what deal are you looking at now? Let's analyze it. Let's make sure it makes sense for you and pencils from a deal basis too. And then move forward to actually submitting an offer and all that. So it depends on the stage, but in general, yeah, I'm pretty active. And if someone needs to hop on a call for anything, I usually just hop on a call with them.
Right. So now I'm curious. So from a personal level, right? Talk to me, I guess, about either the most recent deal you've done or a recent deal that you did to get an understanding of, where and how you're finding opportunities.
Sure. So, I mean, basically where I focus is mainly tertiary markets, right? So I'm not focused on major markets. I'm not focused on anywhere where I'd be competing against anyone who has a lot of money and a lot of skills, right? I want to be the smartest idiot. That's it. And I think a lot of people's, seriously, that's it. I mean, a lot of people have this ego that prevents them from doing it. It's like, there's zero reason for you to be in LA or New York or even Miami. If you're a single investor and you're trying to buy your first couple of deals, it's like, you shouldn't be doing that, right? That's meant for institutional investors. It's meant for bigger guys who are they've already made the money. Now they're trying to kind of hold on to it, right? Yeah. And that's who you're competing against in those markets. So I don't do that at all. If there's a private equity firm competing with me on deals, I know I made a mistake. And I literally, that's like a big problem.
You've gotten too primary.
Yeah, no, it's why would you do that? Right? Like, let me compete against an idiot instead. So basically I'm in tertiary markets, and really looking for home run deals. So across asset classes, example would be the latest deal I just sold this summer. That was a 44 unit fractured condo deal. So I bought 44 of the 48 units initially. I bought that for around 60 a key. It was 2.6 million. And
so 60 a key being $60,000 a unit.
Yeah.
$2.6 million.
So
then, yeah.
So kind of
How'd you find the opportunity?
That was through a broker relationship that I had in the past. I toured a few deals with them and just kind of been in contact for a while. He ended up sending me the deal. I had it locked up by that night. The purchase price was insane. I knew it was worth $100 a door the day I bought it, 90 to 100 at least. So I bought that. I also was able to kind of get a discount because it was a fractured condo deal, not a multifamily deal, right? There were still 4 units that I didn't own. And ended up 18 months later, bought out those 4 additional owners, increased the rents from, I believe they were like 700 in place to like 1,200 or so. And we're maxing out at around 1,600 on the rents on the renovated units. We only ended up renovating like 8 to 10 units. And then ended up selling it for 6.4 or 6.5. I'm blanking on it, but one of the two. So you ended up being a great result. It was like a 5x in 18 months. Yeah.
That is amazing. That's so amazing. And I like the fact, because what I've realized is that in Miami, New York, and these primary markets, like the markets are a lot more priced to perfection, right? Right now, we're pricing a $70 million deal, and the bidders don't know where the other bidders are bidding at, right? We're telling them like, hey, we want to sell it for 70. I get 10 offers. They're all within like a 3 to 5% range, right? So like they're all doing the same math. They're all looking at it relatively the same way. And outside of market dynamics, like they're all going to end up with generally the same result. Whereas you're saying, hey, I'm going into I guess let me ask you about some because for me, I am terrified to invest outside of Miami or outside of South Florida because I'm like, real estate's a local business. I know South Florida. That's where my edge is. I'm not in, Topeka, Kansas or whatever. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. How do you get that deal that you bought? How'd you get comfortable with that market? Did you know it already?
Well, so the idea for the deals I buy, right, is, and obviously the market matters, but I really don't think the market matters as much as people think. I think actually people really overplay it, right? And for me, the only thing that makes a market good is if I can find deals in it, right? I think the average person, they're like, oh, like the demographics are great, the employment growth is great. Like none of that stuff matters, and that's not how you make money, right? You make money when your stabilized yield is above your market cap rate. That's it. That's the only way you make money in real estate. It's not mathematically possible to make money any other way. So that's
wait,
what I focus on.
Dumb it down for me. When your stabilized yield is above your market cap rate, can you dumb that down for me?
Yeah, I can dumb that down. It honestly would be easier if we had a Excel in front of us. But basically, the market cap rate, or just the cap rate, is NOI divided by the purchase price. So the market cap rate is the average kind of sale multiple in the market, to make it easy, right? So let's say there's 10 properties, they average sell for 5% cap rate. That's the market cap rate's 5%.
So if the market cap rate is 5%, if I have a property that yields $5 million a year, that's a $100 million property, right?
Correct.
Market cap rate's 5%. Got it. And now stabilized yield above your market cap rate. Walk me through that.
Yeah. So stabilized yield is basically your stabilized NOI. So after you do all the renovations, whatever value needs to be added, in my case, in that other deal, buying those other 4 units, that's still adding value, but in a different way. All of that divided by all your costs in the deal. So your purchase price, your closing costs, renovation costs, any reserves you had funded, all of that kind of goes in the denominator. And the idea is that basically you're creating a cash flow stream that the market values at a lower rate than you have it at, right? So intuitively, you're making money there. And you could do the math too, right? Let's say it's a 5 cap market, right? And you get your stabilized NOI to $70K, right? And all your costs in the deal are $1 million, right? So you have $70,000 NOI. When you go to sell it, you're going to sell it for a 5 cap, right? Which means, I can't do that math in my head. 1 second. Oh, I can actually. It's just 20. That's 1.4 mil. So you'd be selling it for 1.4 mil, but you're into it for 1 mil, right? Because that's your denominator. So you make 400K.
Right. I think what surprises people, and you hit the nail on the head, it's the numbers jump so drastically when you improve your NOI and sort of sell at a more expensive cap rate, that you actually do have to see the math in an Excel to be like, holy hell, if I just increase the NOI from 300K to 400K and I cap that at a lower cap rate for whatever, market dynamic, or you've improved the property, it's insane what the multiple is, right?
Oh,
so
just to interrupt you, I was having a conversation on Twitter just yesterday about this, and everyone was saying it's so hard to kind of essentially make money. And my point is that it's really not, right? If you can generate, let's say that a 5 cap, for example, is a 20x multiple, right? That's what it is. A 20x multiple is the 1 divided by 20, essentially. So if you can add 200K in EBITDA, you've made 4 mil. Right, that's not a hard thing to do over a long period of time. I think people think it's really hard, but it's really not. And that's kind of the point I like to make a lot too, is that if you think about your goals from a wealth perspective in terms of creating equity instead of creating income, it's just 10 times easier, right? Because once you're inside the asset, manipulating the asset instead of kind of making the money yourself, it's all about just increasing the EBITDA. And increasing EBITDA on a percentage amount, like not that much, is not that hard. Right, especially over a longer period of time, if you know what you're doing, if you're underwriting it correctly. So I think a lot of people really overplay how hard it is to get to the numbers they want to get to, because they view everything through a W-2, like, oh, my salary is increased 100K. It's like, okay, that doesn't get you anywhere. Like, you need equity.
Yeah, I remember you tweeted this in like late 21, early 22. I think you just flat out said, if you're not making money right now, you're not an entrepreneur. Like, please stop whatever you're doing. I thought it was so funny because everyone found a way to make money, or a lot of people found a way to make money when, money was easy and flowing around. Oh. I think something interesting to sort of segue to is that you said most people have a W-2 income and they're, going from 50K a year to 70K a year to 95K a year. And I think you and I are fortunate to sort of understand that it's all BS if you're going from 60 to 75 to 80 to 90. It's like, what are you learning? Who are you surrounding yourself with? What path is this putting you on? Like, focus on that. And I think the article that I've probably most shared to people that not probably, the article that I've most shared to people that have reached out for advice and help has been one that you wrote a couple years back called Decoding Real Estate Careers. And I'll link it here, wherever I post this. But can you sort of just walk us through, the punchline of that article?
Yeah. So, I mean, real estate careers, there's obviously a ton of them. I don't want to offend anyone because the article is written pretty blatantly, but basically you only want to be in a few careers, right? Basically, you want to be on the acquisition side if you're a principal, and a principal is the person who's buying and selling properties, and not like personally, not the broker who's in between the transaction, but you're the one actually owning the properties. So in that case, you want to be on the acquisition side, which means you're the one actually kind of underwriting the deal, talking to the brokers, and closing the deal, right? Everything after that is asset management that, depending on the firm, sometimes it's handed off, sometimes it's not. But the important thing is you're the one who's bringing in the deal, you're bringing in the revenue, and that's why you get paid way more, because you own part of the equity, essentially. Mm-hmm. The other things that are kind of doables on the brokerage side, right? And I think actually everything on the brokerage side is pretty good, right? Between equity brokerage, nice, debt brokerage, and capital markets. I think those are all generally pretty good jobs. Mainly because it's the same thing. You're an employee, but in reality, you're running your own business, right? You're bringing in the deals, and you get a piece of the deals. It's not the same thing as pure equity because you don't own the upside in the deals, but you do get a piece of the transaction, which obviously leads to making way more money. And then really on the debt side, you want to be kind of in the it's essentially acquisitions, but on the debt side, right? So you basically
like originations.
Yeah, the easiest way to think about it is acquisitions on the debt side, but it's originations, the perfect way of putting it. Or the kind of relationship guy at a bank, it's the same thing. They have a lot of different names for it, but really that's all that's happening is you're working a job, but in reality you're not, because you're the one bringing in all the revenue. So it's you could run your business working anywhere, whereas all these other people couldn't.
You're turning yourself into an asset or something that can produce an asset, building equity that can then multiply. So instead of looking at what you're making on a linear way, I make 60K, then I argue and push and work my ass off to try to get to 70K and 90K. You're like, I know how to multiply money and equity because of what I'm learning and who I'm sort of surrounding myself with. And it's funny because I actually had a friend recently. He's a development manager, right? And super smart guy, very much in the weeds for a big developer in town. And I remember having the conversation with him a while back, like, hey, I sell land. I should start showing you land so you can start bringing into the company like future projects and like future like a development pipeline, not necessarily just have you say, here's your baby for the next 2 years and, go for it. Just make sure it gets built on time and below budget, and everything gets built over budget and over time. And the funny thing is, he was like, yeah, sure. But what happens is when you have a W-2 job, especially if it's a tough job that's paying you 6-figure salary, like it's time consuming. You're busy. And what ends up happening is what happened to my friend, the market slowed down. He now doesn't have another project that the developer's building, right? So like he's basically like, here's my baby. I've delivered this baby. I've delivered the project, and now I don't have another project. So then he calls me back like a year later, and he's like, hey, dude, can you start showing me land deals? I want to be more acquisitions focused. And I'm like, yeah, man. Like I've been telling this to you for like 2 years. Like get in front of pipeline and business. But I think I guess intuitively people just don't see it that way. And basically you want to get closer and closer to the equity in deals. Like it's sort of how you multiply yourself and your money and leverage contacts. So generally, I guess in the market today, I'm curious just your sentiment. Is it, hey, I'm still finding deals, I'm still putting out offers? Or is it, hey, I think it's looking really cloudy and muggy out there and I'm keeping my ear to the ground, but I think there's going to be better opportunities in 6, 9, 12 months. How do you sort of approach today's environment?
Yeah, actually, I think it's a good question. So I was talking about this on Twitter maybe like a week ago. But anytime someone says like, I'm out of the market right now, or that they're waiting for it to bottom or something like that, to me, that means they just have no clue what they're talking about, like zero clue. It's such an insane position that it just makes no sense. It basically is insinuating that you can only make money when the market goes up or down, this isn't the stock market, right? Like it's a real business and you're the one adding value to the business. So if I had a deal where, for example, right, let's say you have a deal where the market cap rate's 5% and today you can stabilize at a 15, right? Just to make an extreme example. Would you not buy that deal today because interest rates might go up?
100%.
You'd have to be a moron
no matter what
not to buy the deal.
are.
Right? It's like interest rates can go wherever they want. I would still buy that deal. So to me, it means they, one, don't know how to value the business of real estate, right, at all. And then two, it means that they don't understand how to create value in the business, right? Which means you're the one doing it, right? The market's not doing it. Otherwise, you're just betting on rent growth, which is fine. But like at that point, yeah, you might as well be in the stock market because who cares? It's just a guess. The point is that you own the asset, you can control the asset, and you should have a very good idea of where it's going to stabilize. And if you don't, that's a big problem. But overall, I mean, there are deals where, let's say interest rates go, and actually that 48 unit deal I sold is a perfect example. Interest rates went up 300 basis points during that time. It was still 5x in 18 months. So like,
yeah, the market worked against you.
The market could not have been more against me the entire time. And it was still a complete home run. So it's like a really stupid viewpoint. And to me, it just means they don't know what they're talking about.
I'll tell you this, and I'll push back on what you're saying just a little bit. What I notice, and it's sort of surprising to me, is you have the luxury of not having a machine, like a real estate operation that you have to just feed. So you're nimble and you can do a $2 million deal here, a $7 million deal there, this market, that market, which allows you to be more flexible, right? What I've noticed in this market now more than ever is that like when I'm talking to a developer whose entire business and equity sources and relationships are, hey, I am a developer, it doesn't matter whether it makes more sense today to buy an existing asset that's already cash flowing that you can buy below replacement cost. The developer is like, show me land, I am a developer. I am going to develop. And they've got this machine and they've got this payroll and they've got these people that they just sort of have to continue feeding. And again, for me, I even tell developers, I'm like, hey, instead of potentially committing to this deal where you're going to be building a deal to $350,000 a unit, how about you buy this brand new stabilized cash flowing asset nearby for $280,000 a unit? And they're like, I am a developer, right? Like, show me land.
Must be fun to be their LPs. That'll be good.
It's so interesting for me. But that's why, for me, I met someone that's a fund of funds guy, right? So he's not the actual GP, like running the real estate deal. It's sort of thinking like a family office. People give him capital and then he goes and like allocates that capital. And what I found interesting is that when the market, like right now, he's doing pref and mezz, which I think is an interesting part of the stack to be in, and it's very liquid. And in 2020, 2021, he was the anchor LP across a variety of existing multifamily value add acquisitions where it was like 10-year long-term fixed rate debt. So your debt's at a 3.5, you're buying this thing at a 4.5, and you're going to put it at a 5.25 or 5.5. And my whole thing is like, okay, this guy, I give him money and he's not constrained to one strategy. He has a worldview across different operators. He finds the best operator in each niche. And he says, I like your risk reward today. I like your risk reward today. The last guy I interviewed, to give you an example, which I think you would find him very interesting, he went from doing $355 million deals to like, north of 9-figure deals to now doing sub $10 million bridge loans. And he's basically like, I am finding first lien positions. I'm giving out loans between 35 to 50% LTV on a first lien position, and I'm getting 13 to 15% with
who's like
fees
the borrower
going in and out.
Who's borrowing?
Yeah,
13%.
So listen to the
40% leverage loan.
listen to the first episode of the podcast. I'm interviewing him, and he's basically, my surprise was I thought the borrower would have been a super mom and pop person that like, this is the one deal they have and like they just need help, right? Mm-hmm. And he's like, no, there's just guys that I know that I've built relationships with and brokers across the country that their niche is $1 to $5 million deals. But for whatever reason, especially in this market, the bank can't fund the deal. The other conventional lenders can't fund the deal. The person might be like a retiree where like his business income doesn't support the loan. And my friend is like, okay, it's a triple net lease. You've got a new lease here that's going to increase the lease rate by 2x, 3x, because your last tenant was there for 10 years. But you need money today, like a bridge loan, to pay your TIs, pay your LC, your leasing commissions.
Are they lending it mostly on retail or industrial?
No. So across, he's done warehouses. He's done the last deal he showed me because he sends me his private placement memorandum so I can invest with him as a limited partner. The last deal he showed me was like a school in Orlando was like the tenant, and he sent me another one which was like a storage deal, and they all just have these quirky scenarios where I can totally see why a bank is like, oh no, we just can't do that. And he's got a first lien position at 13% at 35% LTV.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought that's a huge hole in the lending market, especially when you're even so that 48 unit deal is another perfect example of this. At $60K a key, it almost didn't appraise for the bank to get the loan.
That is crazy.
And I had to like beg them. I was like, you guys are out of your minds. Like, this thing is so undervalued. And they're like, oh, like, I don't know. Like, we went back and forth like for like 2 weeks probably. So I think that's a big difference coming from the institutional space, is that in the institutional world, you're working with debt funds mainly, and those are pretty sharp guys, right? They're actually pretty smart. A lot of them could be on the equity side, and they know how to underwrite deals, right? So they understand, they're like, all right, like, it's a value add deal. We're not going to be insane with it. We know what the actual eventual value is, right? And we're not going to chisel you the entire time on the kind of in place.
Right.
Banks have no conception of that. They're under the impression this makes them like smart. They're like, oh, this income isn't guaranteed. It's like, what? It makes no sense, right? Because you have a market where, and I've told my lender this, you have a market where the vacancy rate is 1%, right? So it's 99% occupancy. And the market rate rent is very well established, right? So if you take a vacant building there if you buy a vacant building, you're taking zero risk, right? It's not possible to take any risk because literally 1% of buildings are vacant, and that's just turnover. That's just turnover. It's always going to be there. So they consider that more risky. Like if you had a vacant building for, let's call it a 2-unit building for $200K, they consider that riskier than buying a fully leased up building for $300K. And it makes no sense. And they think it's like, they're like, oh, the income's not guaranteed. It's like, you guys are out of your minds. Like they're regularly paying horrible prices. Like their last dollar in is always horrible because they refuse to do any deals with like a bit of, not even hair, just like that are somewhat interesting and outside of their box.
Yeah. No, it's so funny you say that. I couldn't agree more. So I actually think, hopefully and fortunately, I understand that there's dislocation in the markets you operate in, right? Like tertiary markets and stuff like that. So for me, I think that's great for you, and you'll always have sort of like alpha and opportunities to create. As we mentioned, it's harder in the institutional world, right? Because it's sort of like who can raise the most money at the cheapest rate, and like its primary markets are priced pretty well. But I hope that with the increase in interest rates that we've seen over the last 18 months that have been, nobody could have predicted this many hikes this quickly. It'll create dislocation that'll allow some institutional investors to create and find more alpha versus just playing the market and being one of 25 bids in my offer matrix.
I think there'll be some of that. I honestly don't think there's going to be that much of it. I think the real estate, the world in general has changed so much since 2008, where everyone saw that. And it's just so institutionalized now that at those higher levels, I don't see it happening. I mean, the game they're playing mainly is whoever bets on the most rent growth wins the deal. That just is what it is. right? And then whoever underwrites the lowest exit cap rate and underwrites the most rent growth wins the deal. And look, sometimes they're right and they make a ton of money. Sometimes they're wrong and they get blown out of the water. And that's essentially the risk that's the bet they're taking. I do the opposite thing where I'm like, look, I don't care about appreciation. I'm going to be in a market that maybe it appreciates, maybe it doesn't, it probably won't. I don't really care, right? I'm stabilizing. I have a stabilized yield that I know is way above the market cap rate. So day one, I'm making money. And if the market goes up, great. If not, who cares? And I think that's real investing versus at the institutional level where it's like, all right, our model says like rents are going to go up 10% this year. It's like, sure, that could happen, but probably not.
CoStar says this, Axios says this. Let me blend the two predictions.
But the even funnier thing is they'll be like, oh, you're in a tertiary market, you're taking more risk. Like, I'm not taking any risk. I'm underwriting the market rent as it is today. You on the other hand, if the market rent doesn't go up, you're like screwed. Just because you're in a market that's like supposed to appreciate, but who knows if it does or not.
So I'm a person right now that is listening to this and I'm going, man, this just makes a ton of sense. How do you, let's say you're like market agnostic, and I know you don't love primary markets and stuff, but like, would you just be in any tertiary market where the deal makes sense? And how do you, is there any vetting on the market?
So,
or you're just like,
the thing about the market, right, is what's way more important is the stabilized yield. Obviously, you don't want to be in a market where there's a huge issue. An example I'll give is like, say, Detroit before it became Detroit, where it's really exposed to one employer or it has a heavily declining population, all of that. Like, obviously, that's not good. But basically what you want is you want them to vet to make sure that the market is just stable, right? Like, I don't vet for growth. I don't care about growth. I just want the market to be stable. And to me, that means, all right, is the economy okay? Is it too exposed to one industry or one employer? Is the population declining? How's the crime rate? Stuff like that, like really basic stuff. I don't spend that much time on it because all I care about is that it stays at least the same. If it stays at least the same, I'm going to make a ton of money. If it goes up, I'm going to make even more money. If it goes down a little bit, I still make money. If it goes down a lot, then I'm probably in trouble. But that's the only thing you really need to vet for.
And I think when you start thinking of like margin of safety, right? Your margin of safety is so fat, right? Like it's like you're buying these deals for free, you know, like at such a low basis that you're just like, dude, I can't possibly F this up more than the basis I'm buying this at right now.
If I went under, that means the entire real estate market in the country is underwater. Seriously. Like it means everyone is screwed. And
what is,
go on.
What is something that in a tertiary market that you've operated in a deal that you've done that like caught you by surprise? And I'm not saying it ruined the deal, but you were like, man, I didn't, you know, whether it was at the deal level, at the city level, entitlements, maybe selling it was super illiquid because who the hell are you going to sell it to in a tertiary market?
So that's another, I think, like somewhat of a myth. I mean, the last deal I was selling, I think we had 12 to 15 bidders.
No way.
Yeah. What I will say is surprising at the sale is that unlike at the institutional level where people are going to underwrite an actual stabilized yield and they underwrite the kind of the future income of the property and that, okay, if we renovate, where can we get to, right? In the sub-institutional
we sell the dream.
Yeah, which isn't even that much of a dream, right? If you've renovated 5 units and they've gotten X amount of rent, the next 5 should get the same, right? It's not like a crazy assumption. I actually think it's almost riskless, but that doesn't really work in the sub-institutional space a lot of the time, right? Like you won't get paid for that income that hasn't happened yet. So in the institutional world, what I would do is, all right, and usually I worked in the office space pre-COVID, obviously, but all right, like we're going to renovate 2 of the 10 floors, right? We're going to prove out that market rent, and then someone else is going to come in and do the work, right? Because we want to be in and out, we want to go to the next deal. That doesn't really work. You actually have to execute on the entire business plan in the sub-institutional space, which is a bit more annoying, but it also kind of makes you more of a crisp operator at the same time. But that's one of the biggest things I've noticed is that like you actually have to show them that cash flow is legitimately there today to get credit for it.
So when a broker sends you a deal, right? Or I guess let's talk about that. So how are you finding these deals in tertiary markets? How are you getting, obviously you said, hey, this one, I knew the broker, I stayed in touch. How are you getting one in the next tertiary market and the next tertiary market?
So I think, and this is another thing I think is kind of funny, when you'll see a lot of people say that they have this one channel that's like the secret sauce for their deal flow. I just don't think that's the case at all. I think you make money by positioning yourself right. And to give an example, right, I think if my niche was buying $100 million plus multifamily buildings in New York City, I don't think there's a single source of deal flow that can get me a deal that would pencil. Not a single source, right? So your positioning is so off that it doesn't matter, right? And let's say by a different token, right, you're saying I'm going to focus on $5 million deals in Idaho, right? I think almost every source would work at that point. So I look at everything, right? I break it down to channels, and there's on market, off market. On market, you have kind of on LoopNet and kind of the major platforms. And then you also have on market through broker relationships that kind of like they send their marketed list to. And then you also have off market through brokers, then off market direct to seller, right? And there isn't that many other options. Obviously, you can do auctions, stuff like that. Not really what I focus on. But overall, I think people really, really overplay that, just like they overplay the market, right? It is what it is. Like, these are the channels. No one has a secret sauce at this point. Everyone knows what they are. It's all about positioning yourself so that you can actually find a deal when it comes through.
And then operationally, right? So somebody sends you a deal in a market you hadn't never even heard of. Mm-hmm. You go tour it, you see it, whatever it may be. And now you're under contract, going to close soon. And once you close on it, you've got a value add program that you need to execute over the next, 6 to 18 months. How do you think about that when this is the first time you set foot in that market?
So I think there's one thing is I think operations are, in the multifamily space specifically, I think it's different for other asset classes, like hospitality is different. I think if your edge is operations in the multi-space, you're screwed. That means you're doing horrible deals, your margins are crap, and like, you're done. Like
what? Sorry, repeat that.
Sorry.
What was it? What did you say?
I was saying, so in the hospitality space, for example, right, operations matter in the hospitality space. In the multifamily space, it's so easy to operate a multifamily building that one operator operates it that much better than another one, right? It's not like you have like a huge gap. So I always say, like, some people will be like, oh, my edge is like operations in multifamily. I'm like, you're done. Like, that's horrible. That should not be your edge. There's no margin there. There's literally no margin. You're not making any money.
My entire audience hates you right now.
I don't care. I'm completely right. And if you look at it from an actual dollar amount perspective, right? And this is how you make money. Let's go back to stabilized yield. The biggest component of your stabilized yield is the purchase price by the widest margin possible, right? Even if you're doing a massive amount of renovations, right? Let's say you're doing 80% of your cost in the deal or the purchase price. The renovations don't even matter at that point. It's so weighted by the purchase price that you spending another 5K unit or 10K unit isn't even going to move the needle on the stabilized yield, right? It's all about what happened at the purchase. So I almost like reject the entire notion of operations being important in the multifamily space. I spend all my time in the acquisition because that's where you make all the money. I think there's obviously something to be said about the value add asset management mattering a bit, but like the stabilized asset management is totally useless. Like, just outsource.
So talk to me about the value add, right? The value add portion of it. So when you're saying, okay, I need kitchens and I need new floors and I need a landscaper and I need, I don't know, somebody physically here to rent out my unit and things like that, where you need bodies and people, who do you call, right? This is the first time you ever heard of this market.
So, I mean, for contractors, I think it's pretty simple. I think basically what you do is you call up, there's two ways to get screwed by contractors, essentially, right? One is they screw you on the price, and they're going to try and screw you. One is they try every time, literally every time, right? So they're going to try and screw you on the price, right? And the next thing they're going to do is they might not do the work right, or they might not do it at all. Those are really the two ways you get screwed by contractors. So with the first, right, just get a ton of bids. And obviously, hopefully it helps a lot more if you kind of know what the price should be beforehand. But even if not, if you get 10 bids, you're going to have a pretty good idea of what the price should be, right? And line up the bids in Excel, understand why one firm is coming in lower than the other firm and call them out on it, and just keep bidding it down until you get to a number you like. Doesn't mean you go with the lowest number firm, because sometimes they're lying to you. But it does mean you should have a pretty good idea of where it should shake out by the end of it. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when you structure the contract with the contractor, make sure that pretty much you always owe them money and they never owe you work. Because that's the other thing, right? If you say you pay the entire contract 100%. Up front, they're walking.
You'll never see that guy again.
You're never going to see that guy again. He's going to be a ghost. You're never going to see that guy
Especially in a tertiary market.
Never seeing him again, right? So every single thing should be structured around the fact that this guy is going to walk off with the money unless you wait. And those are really the two things. Aside from that, once again, I don't even care that much because the deals I do, if I spend 15K on renovating a unit or 17K or 20K, it shouldn't matter at the end of the day because it should be making so much money.
And if it takes 6 months or 9 months, you're like, hey,
the other thing I was going to say about that actually is the huge mistake people make is that they take on some level of debt that has a balloon payment in a really short time, and then they put themselves on the clock for a deal that should be a walk in the park, right? So that's the other way to really screw yourself up in that situation is to take on a bridge loan that's expiring soon that you don't know if you could pay off or not. So if you avoid that and kind of going with lower leverage, that's kind of more permanent, it really de-risks the situation.
How do you think about capitalizing deals, maybe recently or in this market, as it relates to debt or where you find LPs?
Yeah, so I mean, typically what I'm doing is 75% debt, 25% equity. Usually me and my business partner are 30 to 40% of the equity. So we put in a lot. That's why we're only doing a few deals a year. We want them to be high impact. And the deals we want, I mean, we want to put a lot of money in because we think they're going to be great deals. So that's the basic capital stack. I think what a lot of people don't realize is the capital stack is kind of decided for you a lot of the time, right? And that's, if you're going to a bank, right, they want a 1.25x DSCR, which is basically your NOI divided by your yearly debt service. So if it doesn't hit that multiple, the DSCR, you don't really have a choice, right? You can't just be like, hey, I want it anyway. The bank's gonna be like, go fish, right? You can't get it. So a lot of it's somewhat decided for you, but really it's about just the risk profile. And by risk profile, it's almost certainly on the debt side. It's really hard to go wrong on the equity side from a risk perspective. So it's all about managing that, right? And the biggest way to go bust in real estate is through debt, right? Taking on excess debt. And the easiest way to do that is to have a balloon payment that comes due at a time you don't want it to come due, right? That's usually how people go bust. It's not that the debt service payments get too high, although that happens. It's usually the balloon payment that gets them. So typically, if you just have a loan that has a longer term and is lower leverage, it's pretty hard to go bust. It's really as simple as that. I know it sounds like crazy simple, but that is it, right? If you have a balloon payment that's
makes a lot of
85%
sense.
Leverage, you're probably in danger of going bust.
Right. No, you've got a deal that you like. You go to a bank and you go to 5 banks, whatever it is, and they're like all between 55 to 60% debt. And you're like, all right, I got to go find 40 to 45, percent. And then how much do I want to put of that 40 to 45 is, it's a good way to frame it. So I'm curious in terms of asset class, right? So we've talked about multi. Are you exclusively, are you in the camp that like, hey, multi is the best risk-adjusted return, or it's what I know? How do you think about asset classes at large across tertiary markets?
So I look at everything. I look at self-storage, industrial, RV parks, mobile home parks, retail, even some office now. Again, I actually kind of hate the risk-reward of office right now, but I think some medical office kind of makes sense. But yeah, I look at everything. And I think if you work in more tertiary markets, a lot of the times you have to work across asset classes. Otherwise, you're not going to have enough deal flow. Right. It's a bit different, right? There's almost 2 ways of doing it, right? One is you have one asset class and you're kind of working across a larger area or a bigger market. And the other is, okay, we working in a smaller area, so we need to work across asset classes and more geographically focused. So it just depends how you want to break it up. I don't think it's that difficult to work across asset classes a lot of the time. I do think it takes some time getting used to. So like probably the first couple deals you look at is like a pretty big learning curve. But at the end of the day, like a business is a business, right? And it's a real estate business in this case. You just have to learn how to value it and learn what the intricacies are.
Yeah, there was an asset class I was looking at recently. And to your point, I was just curious about it. And within a week, I reached out to like a leasing broker for that asset class and asked them a bunch of questions. And I'm like, okay, they were an expert in this neighborhood, in this asset class. And within a week, I understand where the rents were for this asset class, what people are paying for it, how long it would take them to find a tenant. And yeah, it's like, okay, great. Like I get the asset class. That doesn't mean I'm in the 99th percentile of it. But to your point, if I'm in a tertiary market and I know I'm buying this thing, 30% below replacement or 30% of replacement cost, like, yeah, I'll hire somebody, pay them, and they will lease the building and I will be okay.
Yeah. And I actually think a lot of the time too, right? The easiest part is figuring out the numbers. right? Because the numbers are the numbers, right? And once you learn how to run it on one building, you could run it on another building. Obviously, there are going to be expenses that are slightly different. There's going to be NOI margins that differ a bit, and all that's going to change a little bit. But what I think is actually underratedly the most difficult is figuring out if it's good real estate, right? Like if you're on the multifamily side, it's really easy to tell what good real estate is because everyone has to live somewhere. So everyone knows what they look for in a multifamily building, right? They could say, look at two buildings and say, I'd rather live in that one than that one. And they might not have a firm kind of thesis why, but they kind of intuitively know because they do that, right? So it's easier to identify good real estate in the multifamily space. Whereas when you go to, let's say the industrial space, right? How many people have run a business that operates out of an industrial building? Like, how do you know what the clear heights need to be or how many docks, right? It just, that's not intuitive. And I think that's where it's easier.
Types of docks.
Exactly. Like, who knows, right? It's not intuitive at all. So I think that's where people tend to go really wrong and they don't realize it is they end up buying bad real estate when they go to another asset class because I think the numbers are actually relatively easy to work through. And the real estate's a bit harder to figure out.
Yeah, I love how you approach the market and just real estate investing in general, especially with the internet and audience, social media audience spin to it. I'm extremely bullish. I mean, you've already had a very successful career very quickly, but I'm very excited to continue seeing you grow. Funny enough, there's obviously I work with a lot of developers in South Florida, and there is a developer, right, that has done just as much deals as the other guys, but he looks for home runs and invests a lot of his capital into every deal. And it's crazy seeing sort of his life, what I'm pretty sure his sort of like net worth is and all these things relative to like the guys that are, again, chasing the market, just trying to do market rate deals. If they can raise the capital behind it, great. If they can't, then it's not their deal. And just being sort of at the whim of the market in that sense. So I love the way that you frame it, which is like, I'm looking for a couple home runs a year and I'm going to put all my money into those home runs, or, a lot of my money into those home runs because I'm looking for 3, 4, 5x multiples. Do you think you get to a point 5, 10, 15 years from now where that shifts and you say, now I'm looking to preserve my wealth and not be in a tertiary market trying to 5x my equity multiple?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's basically two ways to make money in the real estate business. One is you're in the more sub-institutional space, let's call it like sub 20 mil space, and you're doing home run deals. And in that case, you make all your money back-ended on the capital you put into the deal and the promote, right? That's where you're making your money. The other way to make money, which I think is actually a way better business model, but personally I find less fun, is you raise a ton of money, you do a bunch of mediocre deals, then you clip asset management fees for the rest of your life, right? And don't get me wrong, that's probably the best business model in the world, but I just find it pretty boring. So I wouldn't rule out ever doing that eventually. I think kind of what goes with that is the idea that the returns are obviously going to be lower. But as long as you give your investors what you promise, if you tell them it's going to be a 7 and it's a 7 and that's what they want, like, sure, right? No one's getting hurt there. But I think those are fundamentally the two ways to make money in real estate. Where you get really lost is where you try and you're in that like middle range of like the 20 to $100 million deals, and you don't do home run deals and the asset management fees are enough to make a lot of money. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, is that's just a horrible spot to be.
That's a super interesting take. Talk to me about, I'm curious, and the answer doesn't have to be I'm super structured and all these things, but like in your day, how much time are you spending sort of like creating content and pushing that forward versus looking for deals, talking to brokers and doing things like that?
Yeah, usually what I'd say is I try, and I used to be way more fire from the hip. Like I said, usually I would say in the morning, I usually get up at like 9 or so, and I'll spend an hour, maybe an hour and a half in the morning, just like looking at the content for the day. A lot of the times I just write stuff down as I go through the day from the day before. So I'll just fire that out if I did that. If not, usually I have tons of stuff that I've just have half written somewhere that I'll just fire out. Or even if I have a piece that I really liked from a while ago, I'll just reuse that. But I don't spend that much time on the pure content side. I would say maybe an hour, 2 hours a day, tops. Everything else is really on the real estate side.
Yeah, and I think having hung out with you in Miami, I noticed that like whether it's Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, like we got together and we just worked. And it wasn't necessarily work. It was just like, this is what I do. This is what I want to do 2 p.m. on any given day. I am interested to look at this deal, see how much I'd pay for it, see if there's wiggle room on the price. So if you're just being productive twice as much as most people, wherever that productivity goes, like you'll probably, end up reaping more benefits over the long term. So I kind of want to finish the conversation by asking you, you've built this massive audience across the community, the boot camp, Twitter, your newsletter. So my guess is that a lot of the people that you're talking to are people that want to make this transition into being, into being a guy that's buying and selling deals, principal for themselves, right? What do you see as like the biggest, what do you see as the biggest hurdle that you see consistently time and time again for everyone that's looking to make this transition, but just can't take the leap?
So I think there's a few things. One is that they're not looking at it the right way. The other is that they're not good at real estate. And the third is that they're not positioned right. But basically, the main thing people try and do is they look at it from like a tomorrow perspective. And they're like, oh, I wouldn't be able to do it tomorrow. And they're right. Like you wouldn't be able to do it tomorrow, right? It's something that you need to actually plan in advance. And I plan my leave 2-3 years in advance, right? Where you have to start buying deals yourself, right? And you start scaling those deals up. So I think a lot of people leave cold turkey and they're like, okay, I just left my job. I now have zero source of income and I don't have a deal to look at. Like, what do I do? It's like, yeah, I'm not going to lie. That's going to be pretty difficult, right? But if you've been buying deals on the side, you're scaling up, you have a broker network, you have an investor network, you have a lender network, and you're prepared to go, it's not really that daunting. And I think that's where most people go wrong is they're like, oh, like I couldn't buy a $20 million deal right now. And you're like, yes, you couldn't. Like you need to work up to that. So yeah, I don't think it's actually that difficult. And I think pretty much anyone, if they put together a 3 to 5 year plan, would be able to do it. The other thing I think people really kind of don't understand, right, is that they're like, oh, what are the startup costs? It's like the startup costs are like $0. What's actually hard is not having income coming in for 3 years, right? Like while you sell your first deal. So typically what that looks like is, right, you're putting in, I don't know, let's say $250K to 3 deals a year, right? And then you have living expenses and you have taxes, you have all this stuff. And usually the first time you get paid out from a deal, even if it's a quicker deal, is 3 years from now, right? So 3 years of that actually eats up a lot of capital. And I think that's what people need to work on is more, not the startup costs, but the ongoing costs until the kind of promotes start hitting, because that's when it becomes very easy.
So in short, and we'll wrap up the conversation with this, sort of see where it is you want to be, understand the market and what you want to operate in, and start positioning yourself to be someone that has those relationships from the brokeraging side, from the lender side, and from the investor's side, so that when that opportunity comes and when that right ball gets, Warren Buffett says you don't have to swing at every ball that gets thrown at you, but when it does and you find it, you already have the other things checked, so you can, hit the home run.
And the other thing is really just, what's your plan for that 1 to 3 year gap, right? Because after that, you're almost in the clear, right? You start getting promotes hitting, big deals, like, yeah, you have a lot of money flowing at that point. It's really like, how are you bridging the gap for those 2 to 3 years? And I think that's really what you focus on is, one, the setup, like you said, and that's just pretty simple. You just start buying deals now. And the next is, all right, we either need a huge cash reserve or we need money coming in during those 3 years. And that's really it. Like it's not as hard as people kind of try and make it believe.
I love how simple you serve it to people because it's the reality of it. I love the fact that not only have you become very successful doing this on your own, but you're also taking the time to teach other people to make this leap. Because I think if I can speak for myself, and I think it's also relevant to you. I learned what I learned, and I know what I know, and I'm at where I'm at because I've had like good mentors and good people to teach me. And I feel like right now you are allowing yourself to mentor people at scale.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I think it's also something like I enjoy doing it. I think it's pretty fun. Like, right, every week I'm usually looking at just people going through the boot camp, I'm probably looking at like 10, 15 deals a week, just all across the country. So it's pretty cool to look at, like see what they're doing. See, I'm like, all right, how does this compare to what I'm doing? Is the risk reward still good of what I'm doing and all that? So it actually helps a lot on my end too, on the real estate side. And it's just fun to watch people progress from not owning anything to owning a few deals. Some people kind of own a few and then scaling up higher. It's pretty cool.
Michael, thank you so much for the time. How can people reach out to you and get connected and learn more about you and potentially jump into some of these communities and boot camps that you offer?
Yes. So my Twitter account is at the Real Estate G6 or the Real Estate God. That's really mainly where I am. I have an email list too, but I think it's kind of hard to get to now. So I would just follow me on Twitter.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I will see you in Miami very soon, my friend.
Sounds good. I'll see you soon.
See you, Michael.